I don't know what all those will be. So that'll be like competencies plus practices to help you, in those, develop those competencies. And so, so really I finished the first bit. So tonight I'm going to be reading The Soul is Countercultural. But I also have the soul. So I've been very productive since I've seen you last. So all these 3 chapters have been written since November. So I'm kind of hoping to, in just the next several months, to get the bulk of it in the computer, and then start thinking about who can help me, pull it together and get it out into the world. So I'm hoping that by the end of the year, anyway, that'll be mostly on its way. So this is The Soul is Countercultural. Oh, and the way we've done these, I think what I'm hoping that this isn't just a thing to support me or give me feedback about my writing. It's more like I'm interested in having conversations about some of the ideas that are put forward in the writing. And so I'm really interested in how you relate to what's being said and what kind of thinking it triggers, or experiences that you've had that are similar. That's the kind of conversation I'm looking more for, because that helps me realize what maybe more needs to be said, or just really helps me understand how it's resonating with people and what it stimulates in their mind, versus I didn't really like that part, or maybe you should try this. Or I think at some point I may end up doing a regular writing group where it's a critique group, but this is more just like, please like what I'm saying and don't say anything mean to me, because I'll probably cry.
So you're not looking for editing or marketing ideas or any of that?
Yeah. Not that any of you would ever do that, but
yeah.
Well, I think.
Yeah, right.
What's the format? I mean,
I'll read, and then
Okay.
I'll just sort of, it's just open.
Okay.
So anything that you thought of,
Sure. Okay.
anything that triggered,
Generally, you
anything,
finish the chapter before we start the discussion, though, right?
I'll just read,
Yeah,
when you're
okay.
done.
Yeah.
And if you step out of line, I'm going to smack you. No, it's really very open and
I'm
easy.
kind of used to that, so.
Yeah, smacked
But
around.
I'll be on good behavior.
Yeah, right. Okay, so this chapter is called The Soul is Countercultural. The soul is countercultural, but not in the way we think. The soul does not oppose the culture we live in, judging it as inferior or somehow wrong. Neither does the soul affirm the culture we live in and judge it as something good. No, the soul is its own culture, emerging from its own set of values. It then lives in and through these values, both alongside and within our own. This can be countercultural in many ways, often inconveniently so. To illustrate this point, I need to tell you about my pastoring gig. I was a pastor once for a little while, which was an anomaly in the strange subculture of evangelicalism that formed me since I'm a woman. From November 1998 to November 1999, I served as interim pastor for a church of about 50, including the kids. Our dear friends had planted this little church in the early 90s, a few years before we arrived on the scene, eventually joining them in leadership. We had moved to Denver, fresh from a huge church in which I had served as an elder, and my husband had established and managed a large prayer team. The culture of that church was dynamic, impactful, exciting, and cutting edge. In the evangelical world, that church was a spiritual juggernaut. In contrast, our new small church felt like a real community. After the hectic stimulation of a very large and growing church, we relished the simplicity of soulful friendship and church without production. A few short years later, however, our friends were ready to call it quits. Shifting trends within evangelicalism meant that small community churches were on the way out in favor of larger churches characterized by sophisticated programs and consumer-oriented amenities. A dynamic speaker, professional caliber worship band, gourmet coffee in the fellowship hall, these and more became standard equipment for a growing church. We were never going to compete with that. Dwindling numbers made it hard to pay staff. Our friends struggled to make a living on the salary we were able to pay. Burnout overcame them and they moved away. The church had dwindled to about 35 adults by then, and we needed to decide what to do next. I was discouraged. The quaintness of small church had worn off somewhere along the way. I'd been secretly praying we could close the doors and walk away without a lot of drama. Maybe then we could join one of those churches with the gourmet coffee. Instead, our friends suggested we either downsize to a house church status or practice something called open church, in which every member was allowed to contribute to the topic of any particular service, kind of like the Quakers. Nothing wrong with the Quakers, they just weren't my style. I wanted to be part of something cooler, let's be honest. After our friends moved away, we met with those who remained in order to determine our future. Should we stay together? We didn't want to come right out and say we wanted to shut the place down, but neither did we want to remain as we were. I didn't want to run a church, especially a small church, and I didn't trust a group of church people to run it themselves. So we volunteered to stay on and lead, but only if we searched for a permanent pastor. Therefore, purely to keep us together, I volunteered to teach on Sunday mornings for as long as it took. Good work, I snarked to myself. Not only did you not shut the place down, you're now the leader. Leading this church, though, ended up being the biggest privilege of my life, much to my surprise. Funny how quickly my attitude changed. I went from too cool for school to, well, okay, I guess, to flat-out awe and bone-deep humility. I began to feel as if I was pregnant with our little church, and it was my job to carry it, feed and nurture it, until it was time to be reborn. Have you ever seen one of those pictures that at first glance looks like a mass of colorful circles in 2 dimensions on a page, but when you stare at it long enough, your brain begins to perceive a 3D image of a coherent scene of some kind? I think they call it a magic eye. Preparing for my sermons was like that. I would sit with an idea or a passage until it seemed to bloom into something more, as connections formed and ideas mushroomed, and revelation emerged. Each week I did my best to deliver those ideas to our little band, and as I did, I felt as if we walked through the wardrobe into Narnia together. I myself was blown away by what came out of my mouth on any given Sunday. Each week, as I presented what had been familiar biblical material, our collective eyes began to focus differently, and we looked into a whole new world. A world in which, the last are first, the poor are blessed, and a kid born in a stable was actually the King of Kings. One Sunday, a visitor showed up. I'm not sure where he came from, but he liked our little group and he played the drums. He struggled with alcoholism, a fact he needn't have told us since we could smell him from 10 feet away. He offered to play the drums for us next time, so we only asked that he be sober when he showed up for practice ahead of the service. He was sober, I think, but only just. He literally reeked. The church met in a small meeting room at the local community center. Consequently, the reek coming off of him saturated the atmosphere of the room in short order and clung to us throughout the service. Jesus once said that whatever you do for the least of these, you do for him, and many have suggested that Jesus continues to appear disguised as the least of these, offering his followers the opportunity to experience him that way. That morning, I chuckled to myself, thinking it would be just like Jesus to show up as a hungover musician asking to play the drums in church, just to see if we would receive him. Most every Sunday afternoon, our little group played volleyball together in the park. Andy was our official leader. He bought the equipment, set it up, hogged the court most days, and encouraged us all to play, regardless of our skill level. He was intrigued by the idea of fellowship and the Greek word for fellowship, oikos. He thought it sounded a little like oinkos, which reminded him of pigs, and he set about christening some of us with our very own pig names. Ward was Pork Chop, his wife Lamb Chop. Pat, because he smoked, was named Jimmy Dean, after the famous smoked sausage. Our former pastor was Abraham, emphasis on the ham, and the motto for our team was, I oink, therefore I ham. Had to be there, I guess.
Oh, that's good.
That was Andy. No pig name for me, thankfully. When Andy first came to the church, he mistakenly called me Joyce. He couldn't remember my real name and continued to call me Joyce. One day I was chiding him, saying, I don't even like the name Joyce, when he said, well, you must have been a Joyce in a former life. Another fellow quipped, then that would make her Rejoice, and that was my name ever after. I still wonder if he knows my real name. To him I will be Rejoice until the day I die. This was us. We had potlucks and played volleyball. No children's program to speak of, no choir, youth program, or adult Sunday school. Our marketing strategy was a sandwich board we set out on the sidewalk on Sunday mornings. Instead, we hung out together, sang a lot, focused on living out our faith. That's all. I would never trade this experience for anything. That year, I learned to value smallness, ordinariness, because really, who were we? Certainly not cutting edge, impactful, exciting, or all that dynamic. Instead, I learned how delightful it is hanging out in small hidden places with small hidden people, focusing on the small hidden aspects of the most important things. But more than that, I learned that sometimes the ordinary things are actually the most extraordinary of all. This became our culture. We were the church of the extraordinarily ordinary, and completely oblivious to that fact. I loved us so much that year. Every week seemed magical to me in some kind of secret way. I felt as if our band of insignificant, inconsequential Jesus nerds were the key to the whole universe, and I could enter a secret underground Oz by special invitation if I wanted, as long as I could see us through the lens of the soul. As I look back on this experience, I'm tempted to dismiss the whole thing, knowing how easy it is to feel sentimental about the past. Perhaps it only seemed powerful and special because it was my baby, so to speak. And of course, every mom believes that their baby is the most special baby of all time. I felt I needed to face the possibility that I was the only one who thought it was special simply because I needed it to be special. But just before we handed over the reins to the new pastor, Ted and I received a letter from a friend who had joined us in our church and had only recently moved away. In his email, without knowing it, he managed to let me know that it wasn't just my imagination, my bias, or something I just needed to believe. Here are some excerpts from his email. This is Mike Musselman, by the way. Ted tells me your new pastor arrives this week. I'm sure there's a growing sense of anticipation for what's ahead. But as I was thinking about it, I realized I actually have some sadness at the news of his arrival. I came during the in-between time, when the two of you kept a brave band of often bruised reeds and sometimes smoldering wicks, warm and fed, refusing to break them or put them out. Instead, you fanned them into flames and nourished them. Yet, compared to where it's been in the past and where it may go in the future, the church's last year might not look like much on paper. But you need to know that what you've done is in no way a small thing. The experts would say that what you accomplished is almost never possible. In fact, it takes a miracle to get a wounded church that's lost its pastor turned back around and ready to move on with a new leader. Big denominations with highly trained clergy who specialize in such things often fail to resurrect wounded congregations. Had I never been told of the circumstances, I'd have gone on thinking as I did that first morning I arrived in February, what a joy it was to be in a brand new church plant, full of people who obviously loved God and were excited to spread the good news. It never crossed my mind that I was visiting a church that had just lost its pastor. Did I ever tell you about my first morning? I came early because I had mistaken the service time with that of another church I had considered going to that morning. The first person I met when I walked in was Pat. He walked right up and shook my hand and welcomed me in. I assumed, because he had greeted me that way, that he was the pastor of this new church plant. In most churches, you don't get so much as a howdy when you're new, and if you do, it's usually the pastor doing the helloing. It's his job, right? Afterward, however, I was greeted by no less than 6 adults and 3 kids, including your son Justin, all genuinely happy to see this stranger in their midst. Now I'm fascinated. As the morning goes on and worship begins, I'm thinking, where has this been all my life? Do these people know what they have here? After a couple of weeks, of course, I pieced together a sketchy story of the church's history, but I'm hard-pressed to believe it. I'd been in churches that had suffered through a far less troubled history and couldn't manage half the spiritual vitality I saw. And each week, as Phyllis shared the good news, it actually sounded like good news. Well, I knew I was home. I didn't care a fig about where these people had been, or the mistakes they might have made, or even where they were going. They were seized by a great affection. They were led by a band of real people, not a professional clergyman in the lot, who were going to worship God even if nobody showed up. And sometimes we did. Mm-hmm. All I knew was I wanted to be with them and to have what they had. I figured in a church like this, God could probably use the mistakes. He might even be able to use mine. The way I describe our little bunch, you'd think we would have become successful. You'd think we would have grown in numbers, attracted a crowd, become a phenomenon. Isn't that how the story goes? Rags to riches, unknown to famous, a star is born? Not so much. Instead, we made it through the transition, hired a new pastor, turned over the reins, and worked like mad to move our little team into the mainstream. We grew. We attracted some good people. We put ourselves on the map, relatively speaking. Little did we know that in the process of returning to the mainstream, we would lose what we really had when we were nothing special. It's as if we traded our homegrown secret recipe taco truck for a Taco Bell franchise. We didn't know how rare and special we were. We were just making tacos. Isn't this how you do it? Besides, we didn't know there was a trade involved. Since our ordinary magic was so much a part of us, we had no idea it was at risk. No idea we were choosing a trade. We traded it in because, let's face it, Taco Bell sells a lot more tacos to a lot more people than a food truck. Food trucks weren't even a thing back then anyway, so if we wanted to sell more tacos to more people, what choice did we have? Wouldn't it feel good to be part of a successful chain like Taco Bell? What if we could be the best Taco Bell in town? Wouldn't that be great? Let's do that. That's what we did. We hired a guy to take us to the next level. He assured us he knew what he was doing, and his credentials within our particular denomination were strong. From day one, he focused on making us viable as a church and attractive to the community around us. His first priority was to eradicate every bit of smallness, every shred of shabby ordinariness that marked us as uncool. We got a new name, new signage, and we strategized about marketing. We attracted some good musicians and brewed decent coffee in what passed for the fellowship hall. Trusting his expertise, we pitched in and helped with whatever he asked us to do. It wasn't long before I knew the essence of what we were that year had slipped into the mist. We took another 6 years to realize it wasn't coming back, and by then my heart was in pretty bad shape. One day we left, never to return. The moral of the story is this: the soul offers a taste of glory in the form of the ordinary, almost daily, I suspect. Yet almost daily, I prefer the shiny objects, conventional measures of success, and the comfort of conformity instead. I can hardly help myself, the pull is so strong. But my heart remembers the treasure of that year, 20 years ago. So occasionally I'm inspired to look with different eyes and treat myself to the glimpse of glory sitting right in front of me, disguised as something ordinary. The moral of the bigger story is this. If you want to live by the movements of the soul, you need to know that the soul lives by its own creed, with values that put us in conflict with the culture around us. Eventually, a clash will occur between conventional wisdom and the invitation of our souls, and we'll be asked to choose. Choosing soul over culture will cost us something always, and the reward, if undeniably awesome, is usually only personal and almost always hidden. What are the values the soul holds so dear, the qualities that compromise the soul's inner culture? I don't presume to have a definitive list, but let's highlight a few just so we're on the same page. How about these for starters? Integrity, courage, compassion, generosity, kindness, humility. What's not to love about these? Or simpler still, how about love? Maybe all the values of the soul could be summed up in love. This is good news. It's wonderful to consider we have within us a true north, a deep self that is never enslaved by the drama of our shifting cultural trends. The soul simply does not care how many likes we collect on our Facebook post, who thinks what about whom, or what the latest trends may be. The soul is tuned to a different channel, its own. Good news, because the values of the soul are adaptive, life-enhancing human values. Living by them leads us to wholesome, healthy living. Is there a downside here? How could living in and through the soul, guided by these wonderful values, possibly have a downside? Well, here's how. The soul, merely by existing within us, living as it does by its own set of values, creates a conflict at the core.
Hello!
Oh my gosh!
She made it.
You made it!
Whoa!
I'm so sorry.
It was just a joke.
It was a joke. I'm sorry. No! Yeah. Well, I
She's
figured
dropping off the
driving-
salad, then she's heading out.
Yeah, is there any food left?
There's
a
lots
lot of
of
food
food.
Yeah. Can I grab?
Yeah, grab a
Please,
plate
go grab
and
it,
some
yeah.
drink.
And a drink and, yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you came.
I figured I'm driving, like I saw Castle
Yeah.
Pines Parkway, so I was like,
What? That's okay. We'll wait till Susan.
no, Cole, keep going,
Thanks
keep
for
going. I
dropping
already
in.
interrupted.
So, click there, left there.
You know what to do with it. You're from the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, there's. Thank you.
And get her something to drink so she can catch up.
Are you going to be quiet? Can I read?
Yes.
Okay. Just kidding. Okay. I'll give you a I'll
Give it.
The reward, personal and
Yeah.
Hidden.
Yeah.
Hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reward, if undeniably awesome, is usually only personal
Yeah.
and almost always hidden.
Yeah.
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 Damn.
It's not
So
monetary.
But
not
Not
monetary.
monetary?
not monetary. Yeah.
No.
No guarantee of fame, fortune.
The chair's on somebody's phone.
Whoopsie.
Oh.
Yikes.
Good catch.
Yeah.
And the room here.
Yeah, there is couch room over there.
Yeah, somebody wanted the corner there.
Or we can-
Here we go. It's good.
We can take the corner.
All right.
Somebody sneaking.
We're good, I guess.
Or you could sit here if you want.
It's okay.
Okay.
Okay. This is the downside. The soul, merely by existing within us, living as it does by its own set of values, creates a conflict at the core of us. The soul's own goodness constantly invites us to see differently and choose accordingly. Meanwhile, the ego is charging ahead with its own agenda, shoring up power, defending its right to be in charge, judging itself by the reflection of the culture we live in, striving like mad for significance. As we yield to the emergence of the soul, we open to the realization that things need to change. If we've been formed by the pull of popular culture, we'll experience the soul's agenda as, well, counter to that, because the soul redefines things according to its own context. Take the concept of ordinary, for example. My experience with pastoring flipped upside down the meaning of ordinary. Our ordinary little community church became powerfully extraordinary, in stark contrast to the trending church culture of the time, which ended up looking ordinary to me, since most of the popular churches around us looked pretty much the same, gourmet coffee notwithstanding. Compared to the magic we had enjoyed during that year, our church under new management, while trying to become remarkable, instead slid into the ecclesiastical version of Taco Bell. Who's ordinary now? Which leads me to how the soul defines success. Was our little church successful? I believe it was. Were we successful after we became a normal church? Not as far as I'm concerned. But from the outside, it looks completely different. From the outside, it looks as if we barely survived until, thank God, someone arrived to save us from ourselves. On paper and numbers and finances and branding, we were finally relatively successful. To my soul, my heart, my experience, however, our new church was a heartbreaking failure. Would it have been possible to be both spiritually alive and conventionally successful at the same time? Oh, what a juicy question. What a tasty, tempting morsel. Is it not possible to do both? We obviously thought it was more than possible. In fact, it was my mission all along. The answer is yes, of course. It is possible to have both. Daily, we are exposed to authentic, soulful offerings of one kind or another that become conventionally, even wildly successful. Just today, I heard an NPR story about a couple of men who wrote a song about Paradise, California, in the aftermath of the devastating wildfire that destroyed that city. Video of their simple performance became popular on YouTube, so much so that they were invited to record their song professionally. It's a heartfelt song that has comforted many survivors. It holds a lot of tender meaning, not just for people from Paradise. Now the professional version of the song can be widely enjoyed. Songs such as these, works of art, viral videos, these become popular and sought after precisely because they have the ring of authenticity to them, amidst the derivative mediocrity that saturates most of our cultural diet. We're hungry for this. A word of caution, however. Our need for conventional measures of success can get in the way of our soul's purpose. The soul doesn't care about hits on YouTube, retweets on Twitter, or dollars paid. The soul has no need to validate its own work this way. These can be perfectly legitimate ways to run a business or spread the word about something wonderful, but we need to understand what the soul is ultimately after, as well as what it needs in order to count. The soul's expression needs none of these external measures in order to consider itself legitimate, valid, valuable, or even precious. In addition, once regular measures of success are in play, the temptation to turn aside from the soul's original work is immense. As long as we're dependent on external, culturally derived measures of success to validate our lives, the soul's purpose is compromised and ultimately limited. And what about the soul work done in secret? The vitality hidden in ordinary places? What about those souls whose lives will never be noticed or successful? How do we judge them? I'll never forget one shining moment from the talent show we attended when our kids were in high school. Typical high school acts ranging from very impressive to dubious at best left us clapping politely for the most part. And then a young woman, obviously blind, came onto the stage with her accompanist. Her appearance was in stark contrast to the hip girls dance team that had performed right before her. She wore a cotton dress that reached past her knees, no heels, no makeup, and no self-conscious shield or sense of bravado whatsoever. I winced at her vulnerability, afraid for the reception she might receive, so obviously out of touch with what was cool. This was high school, after all. And then she started to sing. I wish I could remember what Broadway standards she offered us that night. I only remember her performance was exquisite. Her skill, talent, and training, her expression, musicality, and interpretation of the piece were excellent. Even more powerful, however, was her pure, unvarnished delivery. She was incandescent. I wept through her performance. I want to weep now just thinking about her. Her blindness made her completely oblivious to the culture in which she was performing. Unhindered, she was pure, unguarded soul, glowing like a lit candle, taking me apart right there in the auditorium. I have a dear friend who spends her life bringing relief and relationship to Palestinian refugees living in permanent refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon. She tells me about the kindness, generosity, and loving hospitality of the people she serves, and the bond she feels with them, and the vitality she witnesses in the midst of extreme deprivation. They will very likely never be legitimized in our lifetime due to the complex nature of their history and politics. They are destitute, without citizenship or human rights, yet their souls shine bright. And my friend, in the eyes of Americans, for a myriad of reasons, too often her work is completely invisible or grossly misunderstood. Her organization is chronically underfunded, yet her work is a vivid example of the kind of work that comes straight from the soul. There's no place you would rather be. Consider the poor, the disabled, the obscure, the disenfranchised. Like all of us, they need to know that their souls are alive and well, and that their lives, lived in and through the soul, are legitimate in all of the ways that really count. Living from the soul takes incredible courage, precisely because it moves counter to the culture of our time. If we let ourselves believe that the soul is its own measure of success, we gather the strength to continue in the work. If not, there's nothing like the lure of cultural validation to derail us in our process and abort what would otherwise be our unique contribution in the world. I personally doubt our little church could have pulled off both kinds of success, given the players involved, including me. But that doesn't mean we ultimately failed. I secretly believe the whole episode was a wonderful but time-limited experience, designed to teach us all a very soulful lesson, that things are not always what they seem, that we are invited into Narnia by our ordinary means, often, and that sometimes merely turning aside and crawling through the wardrobe is the very definition of success. Due to its countercultural nature, the way the soul reconfigures everything can be very disconcerting. Like that old adage about the grain of sand inside the oyster being necessary for the creation of a pearl, the rub created by the soul's movement is a necessary ingredient for transformation. Although this tension is essential to the process, we tend not to like it very much. When you find yourself chafing from the rub, and trust me, you will, I suggest you consider the possibility that your soul is asking to make a few small adjustments in the way you're living your life. Just remember that, like the mouse to whom you give a cookie, it's going to want a glass of milk. In other words, if you give your soul permission, it will do more than make a few small adjustments. Your soul will excavate your foundations and reconfigure your relationship with almost everything. If you give your soul permission, it will systematically, step by step, revolutionize the way you live your life. And if you hang on long enough, trusting your soul to lead, you will absolutely love it. This is the pilgrimage. This. Don't say I didn't warn you. And you're welcome.
Right on cue.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you got here just in time to hear your
Just in time.
paragraph.
Yes.
I'll confess, I like Taco Bell.
I second the motion.
You don't like churches like
No,
Yeah, right. Just
I don't expect any soul from Taco Bell. They don't advertise that.
When you get the authentic stuff, it's like, oh yeah.
You can like both.
You can.
I can like both.
that was, I think of all the readings you've done, that was the one that hit me the most. Yeah. The others were really, really good, but that, I mean, the spirit, the soul.
What about it?
The few things, like you say, that it doesn't matter where you're living, how you're living, to make a soul complete and generous and everything. So, yeah. It's not the monetary or the superficial or anything else.
I liked how you said the spirit lives by its own creed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think your examples showed that, and shows the gains and the pains, and the upsets, the unknowns. And I think that statement for me, it just made me value the soul. That it's really its own character, its
Yeah.
own essence.
Yeah.
You know, to say that it lives by a creed, its own creed sets it apart.
Yeah.
Not alone, not disconnected, but that.
Yeah, it's just getting clearer and clearer to me that our soul's really, it doesn't care how long things take, or how convenient anything is, or how hard something might be, or how much we resist, or how has no urgency. It just is like, it's I'm here if you want. If you don't, okay. But we run by the clock. We don't want to waste time. We want things to be sensible. We want it to, and the soul's just like, okay, whatever. But if we kind of listen, if we tune in, then we can kind of get with the program. It's a whole different program. And, I don't know. just kind of, it's its own deal. So we're our own deal. And the upside downness and inside outness of everything is really striking me.
I think that's where, I mean, it defined, for me, that defined how it's countercultural.
Yeah.
It's not really, but it is. I mean, it's only in its essence. It's not its attempt. It's narrative. It's desire. It's a judgment from our perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of movements that are actually countercultural, like the Amish or the different sects or different types of people who believe that the culture is bad, and so we have to withdraw from the culture. But then it doesn't work either. It's not like setting yourself apart from the culture, like that's the thing. It's like, it's not that it's bad or it's not that it's good. It's just irrelevant in some ways. And I like that. I think.
Did you take your ego with you into your separate space?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how soul doesn't even judge ego.
Yeah.
So it's just like, okay,
All right. You want to do that for 10 years? Knock yourself out.
I'll be here.
Yeah.
Still waiting to do that transformation on the other end of that time. Yes, yeah.
I'm here every day.
Still calling out.
For me, it made me think about, how I evaluate my life and thinking the different careers that I've had and different journeys I've been on, and oftentimes I say, and I really believe, I wouldn't change a thing, but at the same time I look back on them and struggle sometimes to evaluate, what happened.
Really?
Yeah, and it's like, well, I can't look back and say that anything's been terribly successful, but at the same time, by what standard am I saying that?
Yeah.
And I stand by my original statement. I wouldn't change a thing because I know that that's the path that it's taken for me to get to where I am and who I am. And maybe it could have been faster.
I don't know. You're pretty speedy. I've never known anybody go through so many careers in the time that I've known them.
But at the same time, it's like, that your writing in the chapter made me really think about that. What kind of soul work was being done in those times and processes, both in my soul and the souls of others.
Yeah.
And I'm not the one that gets to really evaluate that.
Yeah.
In my theology.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's really profound.
I think about one of the examples I often think about is our son Justin, who decided to get his bachelor's degree in clarinet performance because he loved playing in ensembles, loved music. We're like, hey, go for it, do it now. You can always work at Target was our kind of our thing. If it doesn't work out, you can always work at Target. And so he got his degree in performance, and then he realized that to be a performer at the level that he wanted to, first of all, he wasn't sure he had what it took to play at that level. And then to be able to perform for a living, you have to practice. And he's like a flaming extrovert. So 4 hours in the practice room every day was not going to cut it. And he wanted a family. So then he was like, well, what am I going to do now? I have a 4-year, degree. Well, I've always liked marching band, so maybe I'll go into music education. So he gets his master's degree in music education, gets a job teaching middle school music, and wants to kill himself. Like, basically just wants to slit his throat. Hates it. And then he's just like, what have I done? Like, what a failure. You know, so he starts working at Office Depot in Texas. They're living in Texas. And long story short, they decide where they really want to live is here. So they figure out some crazy scheme to live in Colorado again. And he's working at Office Depot, running the copy center. And it works out kind of incredibly for him to move here. So one day he's working in the copy center, and this woman comes in who needs to copy a bunch of sheet music. And
after he moved here.
After he moved, here. So she hands me his sheet music. It's in German, but he, musician that he is, he looks at it, sight reads it, starts singing it, and says, "Oh, I know this piece." And they start talking about orchestras and music and blah blah blah. And she says, "Oh yeah, my friend runs the Denver Pops Orchestra. She's the conductor of Denver Pops. Their principal clarinetist died 2 years ago, and they've been doing subs ever since. And you should, try out." So he tries out for them, and he's now, principal clarinetist for the Denver Pops, and is on their board, and worked at Office Depot, and now he's working for a different job. So, but he still thinks of himself as like a dope, like what a failure. I spent all this time in higher education getting this degree, but he's doing what he loves. So he's got one job that he likes, which is, working with people, customer service, in this job that he likes. And then he gets to play ensembles without all the pressure, and I was like, see, to me that looks like success. Like you're fostering all the parts of you, and you're following the lead of your soul, and here you are. So how do you judge that? How are you going to judge that now? And on his better days, he likes it, and on his worst days, he's like, I'm a failure. And so it only...
That little Home Depot job that he got too, or Office Depot job, was what enabled Dawn to get a hardship transfer and have their move paid for to get up here to Denver from Texas. Because he just came up here and got a job like instantly just down the street from where we live. And with that job, he could offer this paycheck that says, "Hey, my husband lives in Denver now. I need a hardship transfer to Denver with the Social Security Administration." So they got moved up here and got the move paid for with this little job that he just happened to find. So just a lot of things came together that were pretty cool with that. And yeah, he doesn't... He looks at those student loans he has, and he just looks at how he's never, ever going to have them paid off. And he feels like a failure, but there's just been so many little ways in which there's just been this kind of secret life of blessing for him. So...
Yeah, so if we can let the soul redefine success, then we can kind of calm that hell down, and and enjoy how that moves out into the world in more natural, sort of organic ways. So I see this all the time with people in my practice. It's kind of like how are you going to redefine a success, and are you going to believe it, and how much courage it takes really to value those things when we're confronted every day with the standards of success that we have to struggle to keep the faith, so to speak, and so anyway, that's mostly what I wanted to convey. But I think it's one of the core pieces. The soul just doesn't give a flying fuck about anything except expressing itself through each person that's, you know, that's here. And we can judge it if we want, but it's kind of stupid.
Or at least dumb.
Or at least dumb.
Would you say the soul then, because when you think of that story, and our daughter has a very similar story where she took a countercultural leap because her soul was telling her something different than what she was doing, and she did, and it worked out amazingly well, taking a risk that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Especially financially, especially living in LA. She just took this, listened. We were just in a space too, we were able to encourage her, listen to that, go for it, and it was great. But so the soul, and I think you were talking about this too, has its own creed, it is its own thing. It's not determined by all of the cultural definitions of anything, but are you saying it's part of a larger flow, because it's like when you listen to it, when you trust this, then, and it's not like this lottery, like, well then things are going to happen
Right.
your way. It's like that would be scary formulaic thing when we've all bought into that stuff through churches and things. But there is something to it. There's like when we let go of that egoic piece that's trying to make something happen, that's trying to augment your sense of who you are or defend who you are. When you're able to truly be free of that and listen more deeply, there is something already there that seems to join. But I'm a little scared of jumping into kind of the formula stuff. So therefore,
Right.
all your dreams will come true. Like
Right,
the
right.
intro is,
Just
you know,
get
you're
it
rolling
right,
dynamite.
and then yeah.
Yeah, and that's not where I want to go. But
Yeah.
there is something to it.
Yeah.
I think that if I follow what you're saying about what the soul is, then you would actually become more authentically yourself. And authenticity is what people are looking for,
I'm sure.
you know, in leaders and friends and whatever. I mean, and faking authenticity works also, but not long term.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
You know, you fake being authentic. But if you can become actually authentic, then whatever's supposed to happen can happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that what is supposed to happen?
Yeah, or whatever fits with you,
Yeah, there you go.
and who you really are, then really starts to happen, and that's bound to be more successful than living out of who you're not.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about what are the mechanics, what's the physics, what's this. I mean, I used to think that when God's in charge of everything, all you got to do is line up with God, and then everything goes great, you know. And that's easy. It makes sense because it sort of feels like these things, you know, kind of happen, and so. So I'm trying to avoid those easy answers,
Yeah, yeah.
and but also not shut it down either, because clearly there are phenomena that happen around people as they sort of
Yes.
get in resonance with who they are. Like that's one of
Yes, I like that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like I think about with a guitar, if the instrument is really fine and the tuning is just right, you pluck the strings or you play a chord and you get more than just those strings. Like you get harmonics, you get a certain kind of resonance that's larger than the elements that are there.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, sometimes I think about, and there's all kinds of theories about vibrations, thought vibrations
Right.
and emotional vibrations
Resonance.
and that kind of stuff I don't understand, and it sounds a little goofy to me. And then there's some of the things we're learning about quantum physics and about infinite possibilities and how thought affects matter and all that jazz, which is above my pay grade too. But I think that I wonder sometimes if it's just, if we quit being in conflict with ourselves, or trying to like wrangle ourselves into and stay disintegrated and jumbled up, the energy kind of goes like this inside. But if there's some sort of integration and so that these parts aren't moving against, these energies aren't moving against our intentions, and they kind of move in the same direction, how it just sort of, so you can kind of just, if that frees up a lot of, creativity or imagination or something that allows our lives or our existence to just flow more coherently or something. I don't know. I don't really know what it is. And the whole idea of it being that there is some sort of spiritual dimension or some sort of, something larger than ourselves that does enable or come around or something. It just sounds dopey when it starts coming out. I think there might be something that could be something that is somehow working somehow, but clearly just watching people's lives sometimes and watching how it seems like once you get in a certain authentic flow, it's almost like the universe comes around you to
You got really emotional the first time talking about Jesus. And somebody that was so, talk about resonance, and yet, but it did lead him to be crucified. But he knew who he was, and he had that resonance that was pulling him forward. And I was just curious, because you got really emotional when you talked about it.
Yeah, I was just talking to Ted today that this whole kind of upside down, inside out thing is really the core of my spirituality. And I was telling him how it started to really to come together for me in pieces when we started at the Littleton Vineyard, like back when Greg and Sandy were the pastors. I was telling him, I remember this one day very clearly. It was around Christmas time, and the kids were doing this Christmas thing, and just listening to the Christmas story again and again, you hear it all the time. It just hit me like this. How crazy it is, the Christmas story, that supposedly God comes down in flesh and bypasses all the bigwigs and comes right into the worst places in the most obscure part of town, in the most desperate circumstances. Get it? It's kind of like, it was like I sat there and went, this is really a weird story. And then it was like, get it? Do you get it? And sitting there, it was like I could almost see, and I know the Bible pretty well, and all these stories, all these, they're all about that theme, that things are not as they seem, the last are first, the insignificant are really the significant, the hidden places are really the, it's like, that's through the whole damn thing, and I told Julie, I think I saw you at that time, after I just finished this chapter, and I was like, if there's a whole religion about this is a religion. This is something I could do again. I told her, Julie, I could be a Christian again. But I realized it really is my whole spiritual core, that there's this underground thing where everything's upside down and everything is contrary. And it's always been that way. And we're so flippin' blind and stupid and chasing after the ridiculous shit that that I thought that, but it has always been my core. That's the thing that broke my heart about the church. It broke my heart because it wasn't about that anymore. We didn't have a place to be that anymore. It became about something else. And whatever that was so core to who I was just wasn't on the table. Wasn't like it was a bad thing. It might have even been quaint. Might have been, oh, that was cool, or whatever, but it wasn't the core of who we were ever going to be. And I just had no stomach for any of it anymore. And so I just was like, if that's what you're going to be, then go do it. But I'm out. And so that it makes me really emotional, because that was what that whole year was. When I started trying to think, what did I say that year? Like, what did I even preach on that year? Every week it was about that. Every damn time it was about
Rachel's
that.
word. Remember, she had that.
Yeah, before Greg left, I remember we had prophecies and stuff. This feels so weird to me now.
It was
She
something
just got
that
up
came
and
out.
she read this passage about from Hebrews, where it says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him despised the
Endured the
this-
cross,
despising the shame." And so it was like a literal, it was like, this is what we're supposed to do. So we don't know how to do anything else, but if we just look at Jesus like this, kind of, for a year, or for as ever long it takes. So that was kind of my marching order. So every week, that's all we're going to do is kind of tunnel vision around who is this guy, and what was his life about, and what was his suffering about, and what was the death about, and what was that whole thing. So when you kind of narrow the field down to that and put it under a microscope and just sort of marinate in it for a year, you're going to get the upside down stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And it just came one week after the next, after the next, after the next. And it was like, oh my God, it's not like anybody ever said it was. It's about this. It's about this, these little things, And so, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and with that, there's just this whole idea that it's in the suffering that we get the good stuff. And that's just a weird concept. But it's like, when you're small, when you're hurting, when you're struggling, when you're faced with something you can't deal with, that's when you're the most eligible for something of God to show up, something of spirit to show up, something of resilience within yourself to show up, something of authenticity that gets, as it were, refined by fire shows up. And I think that's part of that thing that makes you cry too, is just that idea that this world is upside down, and part of that upside down is that in the suffering there's actually some kind of glory that emerges. And that's a weird thing, but it's there, and it's kind of undeniable. And I find myself, in spite of the fact that we haven't darkened the door of a church except for a wedding or a funeral or something like that for years, I find myself telling my clients when they're suffering about that good news. That this is when they get to be eligible for grace. This is when they get to be eligible for love. This is when they get to figure it out. This is when they can start over, get a do-over. And yeah, it's just, there's something real powerful about that. And it is enough to make you cry. Because I want a world, as you know, Ellen, where the Ted is in control.
The
Right?
Ted.
And it'd be a perfect world. There would be no suffering.
Hail to the
There
Ted.
would be no suffering. It wouldn't be about me. That's how I'd do it. but I didn't get to be the Ted. So we don't have that world.
We do.
You sure
pay
hold a
homage
lot
to
of conferences, though. I mean, give a lot of talk.
I know TED Talks.
TED
Yeah.
Talks all over.
Yeah, I asked my clients, when do you want to have the next TED Talk?
But Phyllis, I love, 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 love your integrity in not just caving to the easy answers, the theological answers, the things that we will jump to, the sovereignty of God, the,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because there's maybe truth in them, but that just takes us out of this soulish way of
Yeah.
getting to know and understand this place that you're talking about, that really is an upside down. Well, you're talking about reality with a capital R, but we've learned it the other way around, that everything the ego knows how to do is reality. But the soul is a guide that is much more true. So I just love that. And in my view, it has taken a lot of courage. I mean, I just have always loved that you were just kind of willing to literally let it all go, all of it. You were just, so that takes a lot of courage. I mean, I walk with a lot of people who are in deconstruction of their faith, and it's terrifying. I mean, you know how terrifying it is. And there's a lot of grief in it, and all of that, and it is so hard. So you haven't compromised that at all, and that's a remarkable, you know, because then the soul really can be the guide, the field guide, because you're not, okay, well, you know, here's something that explains that, let's just pull that right in there. That'll impress the evangelicals, but no, it just doesn't, it's just not even on your radar,
Yeah.
which I love. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I grew up in eastern South Dakota where the land was flat and lots of black soil, and we could grow lots of things, and we'd have trouble growing some things there. And then I went out to the Black Hills, and for the first time I saw a tree growing out of a rock. And I just was like, now how does that happen? Because I knew how hard it was on the farm to grow anything and to have it live. And here this tree had just come right out of a rock. It was growing out of a rock. And you think about that sort of way that life presses through the adversity of a rock, literally a rock. And I think it's just like this picture of what it would look like for our souls to emerge. Because sometimes our lives are like a rock, and the growth that's coming out of there doesn't seem possible. But if we tune in to our soul, there's something that emerges that's pretty amazing.
I had a discussion with somebody about indigenous music, and I don't remember who it was, and it may have been the bagpipe player or talking about the bagpipe. But in almost all indigenous music, they make use of what we call the drone, where there's a tone that goes through it all.
Like the bagpipes.
Like a didgeridoo or the bagpipe or stringed instruments. There's a drone that
Open tune.
banjo.
Yeah.
The drone is a G, and the drone we were talking about it is seen as the soul in resonance
Really?
with
Wow.
the spirits,
Wow.
and that's
Oh my God.
and everything kind of harmonizes and moves in and out of the drone is that constant that's there. That's the
Yeah.
soul in resonance with the spirits or with God or with the land or whatever. And I think you know your analogy with resonance really fits. People like Teilhard de Chardin and others, I think, have theorized that the drone is love.
Mm-hmm.
That is where the resonance is between all religions and with the progress of humankind. What progress we have made
Mm-hmm.
has been where we've been in resonance with love. So I think you're really onto something there, that we can all, I know for me, on an individual level or cultural level or community level, where that's there and we're in tune with that, then we're going to be in tune with the soul.
Hmm. Thanks.
I had, oh, go ahead, Dad.
I was just thinking some of the, I guess we're talking about some, it makes the soul really attractive, but I think a lot of times we feel like the soul includes a lot of suffering, so it actually isn't attractive on the surface, I guess.
Hmm.
But the culture is really, offers a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I give this and I get that.
Mhm.
And that's why we keep migrating back to that, because I know what I'm trading for,
Mm-hmm.
where the soul's a little, we don't know what you're getting into,
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes. And usually it seems to include some suffering for a while.
Yeah.
Or the payoff doesn't come really quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, I think that's the hard part of thinking that, at least somewhere you're talking about with the church stuff, where we're in our own church, little charmingly lame church. Is like,
Charmingly lame. That's a
Yeah.
great tagline for your church.
but we're currently,
Charmingly lame.
or we're currently in a phase where I'm a little bit like, F it.
Yeah.
I just want to go somewhere where they give me songs that make me feel good,
Yeah.
and I can come and go, and there's people that look like us and are like us and the same age. And I think that's where I want to go back to the transaction instead of, I don't even know where to, we're stuck in that. But that's where I think, that's the tension, I think, that how seductive culture is, I think,
Yeah.
compared to the soul. We
Yeah.
always, as much as it sounds, in these moments, it sounds super attractive.
Yeah.
But then we're
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
there, like, oh, it's not,
Yeah.
it's harder to take on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
how to stay there, or, yeah.
Part of why I decided I couldn't be a Christian anymore was because my value system lined up with Jesus, but I didn't want to do what he did. I didn't want to go where he wants to go. Like, I don't want to hang out with those people. It's like, I believe that and I value that, but I don't want to go there either. So I'm disqualified myself, from all the things that I don't want to go to the Middle East and work with that's great. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could believe that and value that on the one hand and know that in me, it just ain't gonna happen. So I must
Never say never.
I must not, yeah. So let me off the hook for a long time. Disqualified me for a long time.
Also, one side, sometimes are we tempted to do what soul work that's not actually our soul work? That things look like what we think we're supposed to do. I think I've fallen into that sometimes.
Yeah.
I do the things that I think we're supposed to do, and that's what soulful people do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not really my soul. That's
Yeah.
the Southern
Cultural
Baptist soul
soul.
I
Yeah.
grew up with,
Yep.
or I have a lot of friends who went to be missionaries, so that's
Oh yeah.
that's what you thought you're supposed to do. That's the soul work.
Mm-hmm.
I have a client that I'm asking her to write her story for me and see if I could use it, but she went to seminary because she felt like she was supposed to, go
Yeah.
to seminary, and I think she got an MDiv or something, and just almost immediately after she graduated seminary, started deconstructing and starting to feel and wasn't sure she could get a job in it, was married, all these things, and things were starting to fall apart. And she had been a dog trainer for a while, so she just to get a job, just to pay the bills, she started training dogs again. And it's a long story, but she ended up, and every week she'd be like, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. She just would have this kind of whiny voice all the time. And so we started just doing this bit of soul work in terms of, trust yourself, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it's been several years. She's still training dogs, but she got out of her marriage. Like, her life really has turned upside down. And recently she got a job at Trader Joe's, and she goes, I love my job at Trader Joe's. I love that I work at Trader Joe's. I love those people, and I love what I'm doing. But I could never tell my friends I work at Trader Joe's. Like, all these people I went to seminary with, I can't even call them and say, I'm working at Trader Joe's and I've never been happier, you know? And I thought, this is a great example. You know, maybe, who knows where she'll end up, but for now, she's parked at Trader Joe's, and there's something about that is really important soul work for her to be doing. I don't know why or how or whatever, but it's only what we put on, you know, the standards we put on somebody that makes you feel inferior for doing the next thing that's right in front of you that you feel like is the next step. And then you have to not lose heart about the fact that this is where I'm supposed to be, and I don't get to say you failed, you know, if I'm listening and if I'm moving according to, you know, some movement, some intelligence that's happening inside me. But and we just get so derailed and so discouraged and so beat down because we took a step and it didn't lead us into fame and fortune or, you know, success. Or back in my charismatic days, I remember we went to some conference somewhere where they were all doing prophetic words and stuff, and somebody finally said, you know, why is it you never hear a prophetic word that somebody says, thus saith the Lord, you will work in a little town in Wisconsin in a church of 40 people, and you will baptize them and bury them and marry them, and at the end of your life you'll hear the well done, good and faithful servant. No, it's always you'll be a prophet to the nations, and you'll have a
Or even Trader Joe's.
or even Trader Joe's, yeah. Or Office Depot, you know.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So I don't know. What do you want to say?
How unusual.
I know.
Look at
Well, I mean,
that.
talk about courage. There's just, I think one of my chapters is going to be daring mildly.
Just kind of her thing with Brene Brown.
I
She's
should have
got
this
this
thing
thing,
about
that
this
damn
like
Brene Brown.
total jealousy about Brene Brown, but I
Yeah.
call her that bitch Brene Brown.
Yeah, that's what it is.
But you know, courage is just the thing that leads you one step out of your comfort zone. That's it. You know, and it counts. But I think that I don't know. Courage is really comes in lots of different forms, and just holding on to your own sense of value in the midst of a culture that makes you want to doubt it and makes you want to quit and makes you want to, you know, bail. I think it takes a lot of courage, and courage forms us in really powerful ways. So.
And she was talking about you as part of that courage, because what you do takes incredible courage every day. And
Yeah, every
we wondered
effing day.
what that's like for you. How do you get that courage, and how do you keep
know
going?
that it's courage.
What is it then? You keep going. You keep,
Stupidity.
right? I don't know. It's something, isn't it?
That's a drive, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's courage.
Well,
I mean, I
it
do-
turns into courage, because you're driven to do things that are really, really hard, and to do those
Maybe,
things that are
but I
hard.
do. I'm afraid.
Okay,
So
but
I
that's
don't know that.
That's
that doesn't
true.
mean, yeah.
I think it's just I feel a responsibility,
Yeah.
and
that,
so I just can't turn my back on what I know and what I've seen. I don't know that I could live with myself. I mean, it'd be much easier. So I don't know that, I mean, I think that's the drive of it.
Yeah. So you don't feel like you're doing this really brave, courageous thing,
No.
and yet, because you know you can't do anything else, you get out of bed every day and you do it.
Somewhat begrudgingly, some days.
Some days.
Like the past 2 weeks, I'm
It's
a
been
total
hard.
loser. You know, my life is a shit show. I have failed on all levels. So I don't, because I'm such a failure here in America
Mm.
for my age. I'm like, I have trouble finding housing because I don't make enough money.
Yeah.
So what have I done?
Mm.
So yeah, but then, there's another article or I get a message from, someone in the camp. Because I have an idea of maybe hiring someone in Beirut that I've known for a long time. And she's like, and I didn't promise her anything and like it's gonna be in a couple of years. And she's like, let's do it, I don't need money, I don't wanna do it. She can't make, her $200 rent a month. So I think it's partly a responsibility, but it's partly because of relationship. Because it's real to me. It's not some theory or object out there. I've seen the real life injustice, maybe in the suffering.
But please don't discount the courage, because you've got all of that real life and injustice and calling and the knowledge that it's what you need to do. Doesn't make it any easier, and it doesn't discount the fact that to keep going, you have to have courage.
I've never thought of it like that though. Also helps being 8. It just does.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Sometimes with the opposition, I'm like, oh, okay, let's do it. Like the more
Yep.
against me, the
Yep.
better.
Yep.
Donald Trump, here we go.
You don't back off from a fight, but that's still different than the long haul thing you're doing, where you've really stuck with it in spite of some big setbacks.
I don't know, that's
Yeah.
what looks like courage to me. But.
Yeah.
Really?
Me too.
And just to believe that what you're doing has value, even when you look around and go, how old am I, and how much do I make, and where am I going to live, and that kind of stuff. To not lose heart, to not let it just pull the juice right out of you, every day. So, and you're not alone in that. I just think there are a lot of people who are having to make that choice every day. What am I going to actually believe today? Or, I think that's courage.
Yeah, and I think, trying to do something different in this, the countercultural is just, you pay for it in a
You
different
pay
way.
for it, yeah.
You pay for it.
Yeah, so. Anybody else? Yeah, I don't want to trap you here in this conversation, but.
At the very beginning, you said to be countercultural is not against culture, but it's, what was the next thing you said?
It's not for it either.
Well, that it doesn't mean that the soul is against the culture just by, as if there's something wrong with the culture.
Like evangelicals do.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
lots of people do, lots of different people groups.
Right.
Like culture is bad, the
Right.
world is bad.
Right.
So we stand against the world. Or neither does it say the culture is good. We affirm the culture, we bless the culture. It's kind of like doesn't give a flying fuck about the culture.
So it's not,
basically,
it's not defined by the culture.
It's not defined by the culture. It kind of
Right.
runs parallel to. It's almost like you guys just do your thing up here. This is gonna be the way the soul moves, and so it becomes counterculture when you are moving, you are cooperating with the soul in a way that rubs up against your own cultural judgments or your cultural context. And so then you have to kind of decide what's real here. how do I know what's real and true here? Because this is what 199 people are saying, and here's what it feels like my soul is saying. And so
Yeah,
Which is what Suzanne just said.
Yeah.
But in this culture, I feel
Mhm.
like a failure because
yeah.
Yep.
what you are passionate about does not make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because in our journey through seminary and church, and all that, the older I get, the more I see that my soul was there. I just didn't pay attention to it, or I allowed the voices to just,
We were taught not to trust it.
you know,
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
trust it, and I just suppressed it, and I let the voices. And now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was right. The soul was trying to tell me, but I was like this drone, not the drone that you talked about, but the opposite, a drone.
Automaton.
Automaton, just going along with the mindless, I just feel like for 15 years, I worked 65 hours a week, and in the end, everybody just beat the shit out of each other, and it's like, why did we invest 15 years when there was no transformation, and everybody just killed each other, and it's like, I don't know, I just think about, I'm thinking about that a lot these days.
Wow.
And how, but the hope I get is, wow, it was there. Even in seminary and in my younger days when I was just this green little 23-year-old kid, it was there. But I was just so overwhelmed, I let the voices drown it out.
I was struck when we went to your book party in that horse barn or whatever it is of a house, that you were fascinated by the children. That there's something real upside down about that in terms of like, here's this great big church and it's all this, it's all about this message and it's all about this great worship band. And what was going on with you was parallel and subterranean in noticing the children and how they interacted with the gospel and with the stories you tell and so on. And it was like even then your soul was kind of that upside down idea that maybe the little children are the greatest and maybe we learn more from them. I don't know, I haven't read your book actually. I remember you read a chapter. And I was just struck, though, that here in this church, it was all about talking to adults and all about all the adult programs, that somehow your niche was noticing the children. I just thought that, to me, that seems countercultural, and it seems really awesome. Does that ring a bell with you at all, or?
The premise of the book was that so many times I think we try to sugarcoat things.
Yeah.
It's like, just be real.
Yeah. And that was from a child's point of view, right? Yeah, because you can't dress it up in fancy language for them. It gets down to the basics. Anyway, just a thought.
Well, I'm thinking dessert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dessert would be good.
Great.
Dessert.
Yep, we have dessert.